As that great patriot Patrick Henry said on March the 23rd, 1775, as wicked armies bent on his country's death and destruction were being formed and sinister plans laid, I shall speak forth my sentiments freely and without reserve. For I consider the ability to tweet, post, write, and debate online as nothing less than the question of freedom and slavery, of liberty and death. This is essentially a case dealing with the freedom of speech, one of the most inestimable rights of man granted to us by Almighty God. The question must be exposed in all its parts, for only then our duty be fulfilled, and freedom of speech lay secured for another day. First, the ability of the citizen to speak his or her thoughts online is inseparable from the sovereignty of the people, which is the only legitimate foundation for a just and a popular government. To come to this understanding, one needs only apply reason and logic, for to do anything else will be as redundant as burning a candle in the street at daylight to help the sun illuminate the earth. If God hath created the mind free, as Jefferson tells us, then it necessarily follows that man has the right to proclaim, whether in town square or on Instagram, his mind. If the citizens cannot do such a simple and basic act as that, then he does not have freedom over his mind. Without freedom over his mind, he cannot scold and inform his leaders. And if he cannot scold and inform his leaders, the people, like any censorial weapon against the usurpers and would-be tyrants of a nation, and have therefore lost all control over their destinies. Empirical evidence has proven this true beyond all doubt. Ethan Zuckerman, an expert on social media at MIT, notes that social media has led to an exponential increase in topics the public is talking about. No longer are party bosses and newspaper editors in smoky rooms deciding what issues and what stories will be distributed for public consumption. Instead, in an era of social media, a group of passionate activists can have a controversy trending with the writing of a mere hashtag. This amplifies the voices of people and citizens usually left out of public discourse. Those who were at one time the most powerless, the least influential, now have the world at their fingertips and can speak their mind and inform and influence their countrymen. This is an explosion of the democratic ethos. Second, social media strengthens voter mobilization and thereby more widely distributes democratic power. Arya Prokasha, a professor of computer science at Harvard University, noted that in 2020, with most people voting through mail-in ballots, the incentive to be seen voting by neighbors and thereby have a feeling of public accomplishment in one of the most divisive elections in modern history was gone. So what may have offset this lack of incentive to vote? Quote, social media gave America a socially distanced opportunity to make voting observable again, and voters could influence their friends to vote too while they were at it. Tisch College came to a similar conclusion in regards to the 2018 elections. The next generation of Americans upon whose participation the legitimacy of the republic relies were found to be more likely to be democratically active citizens when reached through social media, through platforms such as Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. More young people heard about the 2018 election, where candidates stood, and the reasons to vote on social media platforms than from official campaign literature for the first time in American history. This is not only important for voting's sake, but for the sake of America and living up to the ideals that generations of Americans have sacrificed for, written in the Declaration of Independence. That governments get their just powers from the consent of the governed. I will now be moving on to the con part of this challenge. Out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made, said Immanuel Kant. His quote provides a nice picture of mankind's nature and how fragile the conditions of civilization are. Because I agree with Kant, I hold that social media is not a positive good for democracy. Nay, I hold it to be a boon for democracy. The necessary foundations of a free society is a respect for diversity of thought, a strict adherence to calm deliberation, and constant striving for logical, fact-based conclusions. All three of these must be satisfied for a long-lasting democracy, and yet social media works directly against all three. All three. Social media has deeply distorted free and fair elections. For the last several years, social media has continuously been the main tool in the rise and spread of dangerous, radical disinformation campaigns by unscrupulous political operatives and agitators. Examples of this can be seen in the ridiculous QAnon conspiracy, which has misled many into believing, among other things, that a group of satanic child sacrifices take place at a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., headed by leaders of major corporations and political parties, and that JFK Jr. is still alive and would replace Mike Pence in the GOP and win the White House with Trump. This sounds crazy, but it's actively being spread into our political discourse. Similar conspiracy theories, fueled by the reignition of fighting between Gaza and Israel, has led to an increase of religiously bigoted attacks on practicing Jews and people of Jewish descent. Disinformation is dangerous. Disinformation is violence. Disinformation coupled with increased partisan division is a recipe for an explosion of violence across the entire free world. The nonpartisan think tank Freedom House has warned, quote, that while foreign actors engage in politically motivated social media disinformation campaigns against Americans, such tactics are also increasingly used by American political operatives against other Americans. Once this is coupled with the outrage culture of the modern Western world, a time bomb begins to detonate. When our passions can be instantly satisfied and our viewpoints immediately confirmed and reinforced with a click of a button or the opening of an app, then the calm, methodical, and Enlightenment era thinking which has heretofore preserved these United States and the democratic West is gone, and in its place is fuel, gasoline to be poured on top of the fires of sensitivity, over-offendedness, and our raging culture wars. Democracy essentially shoots itself in the foot, and free society is extinguished without one shot being fired by a foreign army. Social media companies have also been instrumental in the crushing of freedom of thought and diversity of opinion, not only here at home, but across the unfree world. While American cities compete to use taxpayer dollars to subsidize communication corporations, those same corporations being paid for and subsidized with our money, corporations like Twitter, are used by totalitarian and illiberal regimes to arrest and silence opposition. Perhaps one of the most illustrative examples was Twitter's collaboration with the Saudi government and Crown Prince, which led to the arrest of thousands of journalists and academic dissidents. Global social media corporations are thereby making a profit paid for with the blood of freedom-loving people and will continue to have an incentive to stifle democratic impulses everywhere, but especially in the developing world. This poses an indefinite threat to popular sovereignty and civil society. Do we want our lives to be governed by big tech corporations and unscrupulous political actors who divide us against each other? I think not.